good afternoon, everyone. I think we are now live, and hopefully you're all managing to log in and click through. I can see the numbers building. We've got quite a few people that are joining the call this afternoon. So I'll just give a second for you all to join and make sure you can hear us all clearly before we get started. But thank you very much for joining. It's clearly a popular topic. Obviously, given the circumstances, I'm not entirely surprised. You know, even though a lot of people are on webinars at the moment, spending a lot of time online, it's still good to know that people are keen to join the session that we've got planned this afternoon. I think we've got about 70 odd people due to attend. I can see we've got just over 60 now, so we're getting there. So I might crack on and make a start. We're now 1 minute past the hour. So I should say, I should start by saying good afternoon, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Andrew Harvey, and I'm the CEO of VMAGROUP. I'm delighted to be speaking with you all this afternoon as part of our, as we say, Senior Interim Networking Group, or as we say, SING for short. We've been running these SING events at VMAGROUP now for some time. And we believe they provide a great opportunity to bring the interim community together, bring the communications and marketing industries together, and actually share market updates, discuss challenges and opportunities together, particularly as we work through right now the challenges of COVID-19. And I hope that the SING event this afternoon will provide another opportunity to do just that. It will provide a great opportunity, an interesting and helpful discussion forum for us to talk about challenges and opportunities in the market right now. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Matt Gibbs from VMAGROUP. Give us a wave, Matthew. Yeah, so if you don't know me, there's every chance that you know Matthew. Matthew manages a lot of the interim work that we do at VMAGROUP, amongst others in the team. But I'm also especially delighted to be joined by our wonderful guest speakers this afternoon. We've got Geraldine. Give us a wave, Geraldine. There you are. We've got Kyla as well. Give us a wave, Kyla. And of course, Simon Monger as well. So a special and a very big thank you to all of our guest speakers this afternoon. So very briefly, for those people that don't know VMAGROUP so well, VMAGROUP is a specialist interim, contract and permanent recruitment business, but we are specifically focused on the communications, marketing and digital industries. We've been around for a long time. In fact, VMAGROUP is 43 years old. It's the same age as me, 43. I know I don't look it, I hear you shout, but it is true. So we've been around for a long time. We're an international business. We have offices in London, Manchester, Paris, and Amsterdam, which means, therefore, that actually we recruit and work on an interim basis across Europe. And actually, interestingly, a lot of the people that we place in interim roles in Europe often come from the UK as well. And depending on how the next 3 months pan out with the Brexit negotiations, I'm told by people I know out there may be some greater opportunities for contracts in Europe. Although how we'll manage that, travel and isolation and that sort of stuff with COVID is yet to be seen. But it's an interesting potential point for the future. But as I say, we are a business that's very much focused on interim and contract recruitment, in addition to the permanent recruitment that we do. So a very brief overview of VMAGROUP there. I suppose the next thing I just wanted to touch on before we get to the speakers is just to touch on the recruitment market right now, and what are we actually seeing? Well, to keep it brief, in summary, we feel that the interim recruitment market at the moment is probably still about 50% of where we would expect it to be at this time of year. So there are jobs out there, but they are limited. We last ran a SING event in August, and actually we said then that the market was about 50% of where it should be. So it hasn't really changed much since the summer. When COVID broke, the market just completely disappeared for a number of weeks and it dropped by about 90%. So we were about down to 10% of where we should be. That grew from 10% up to about 50% in the summer, and it has now flatlined at about 50% of where we would expect to be. How that will quite change over the coming weeks, to be fair, your guess is as good as mine. There are a mix of interim and permanent positions out there, though I have to say we're not seeing the pickup in the interim market that we might necessarily have expected, given everything that's going on. Businesses are still recruiting on a permanent basis. We might have expected a lot of those permanent hires to be replaced by interim opportunities. That's not necessarily happened, although people are clearly recruiting interim roles. There is another challenge as well, just for those people that work often on a day rate. When people do decide to hire non-permanent staff, there's still a strong mix of day rate work and FTC roles as well. So I think that it's fair to say that some of the day rate work that we would have seen in the past is being stifled a little bit more by more organizations going down the fixed term contract route. And of course, the market at the moment is competitive. And I say, well, I touched on this earlier a moment ago. I mean, given the current situation at the moment, the conversations that we're having, we're not necessarily seeing a volume increase in job opportunities over the next few weeks or months. We expect the market probably to stay where it is, so knocking along at about 50% rather than going back up to 60, 70, 80, unfortunately. As I say, it's difficult to know whether it will pick up or slow further, depending on further restrictions, depending on the economy, etc. But on a positive note, there are opportunities out there. There definitely are opportunities out there, but they are slightly more difficult to secure. And the process for finding that next contract role is arguably taking longer than it would have done before. So the question, and one of the things obviously we're talking about this afternoon, is how do you deal with that? How do you deal with a challenging job market, looking for your next interim contract, onboarding into an organization in a pandemic, and how do you deal with a lengthy job search? And hopefully we'll get some insight from Matthew and our guest speakers this afternoon. So that is probably enough for me. I will hand over briefly to Matt, who'll say a few things, and then we'll hand over to our guest speakers. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for joining today, and again to our guest speakers. My name is Matt. I work in the interim team and manage lots of the contract briefs across corporate communications. We also, of course, have a marketing interim team as well. I guess the reason for me talking today after Andrew is because whilst Andrew is doing his CEO stuff, as he does on a daily basis, of course, it's the job of myself and my colleagues to really manage the briefs, manage the searches, and I guess I can give you a bit more of an insight into what we're seeing, which clients are coming to us, and what they're looking for. So I have a few, I guess, top tips for interim and job searches. But firstly, I just wanted to give a bit of an insight into the hiring needs and what hiring managers have been looking for over the last few months. So firstly, increased workload. As you'll know, communications has never been in as high demand, particularly on the internal communications side of things. I did have a call a few weeks ago from a client within the FMCG sector. This was on a non-disclosure agreement, but within the FMCG sector, who essentially said to me that her team of 3 has been overworked the whole year, particularly obviously since March, and they're just at burnout stage. They're absolutely exhausted. And she said to me, look, I really need an interim who's got solid contracting experience, who can come in until the end of the year and really just relieve her team of the increased workload that they've been going through over the past few months. It was a bit of a tough search. She did need FMCG experience, global experience, and also ideally a second or third European language. So it was quite a niche search. And again, one thing I'm seeing a lot more is that with the increased numbers of people in the market at the moment, hiring managers are maybe being a little bit more particular around sector-specific experience. I'm seeing that a lot more compared to what I saw before. But within the week, we managed to find the right person. They'll be starting on Monday. Change. Although projects across organizations may have been put on hold, they are starting to surface again. A large UK bank did come to me a few weeks ago, and they had a big Project Acorn, they called it. I'm not quite sure as to why they called it Project Acorn, but Project Acorn. And that was all around the return to the office. Getting their employees, understanding what was required and what their plans are to get people back into the office. I imagine that's probably changed since with this new tiered system, but that person that ended up securing that role has got quite the job on their hand. They ideally wanted somebody that had, of course, significant change experience, ideally something similar, so maybe an office relocation, and that was a £400 to £500 a day role for 6 months. Maternity covers. Although look, there has been lots of change, something that has stayed the same is that people, of course, are having babies, and they do need maternity covers. I would say around 25 to 30% of the roles that I've worked on since lockdown have been maternity covers. This has been higher than average percentage, more due to the fact that the change projects have been put on hold, maybe not due to the fact that there's been more people having babies. Although, of course, 6 months of lockdown, who knows if that will change. Hiring freezes. Something that has happened is that there has been permanent hiring freezes across organizations, but that hasn't necessarily impacted the interim market in that I have placed a few contractors into roles in large global organizations who have had recruitment freezes because interims don't count against their company headcount. So that's one way of, continuing with the interim market where permanent market may have stalled. Now, following on to my top tips for interim searches, again, conscious of time and then we have 3 speakers, so I'll try and be very quick. My top tips: quality over quantity. Take time for each application and tailor your CV to those roles you're going for. I may sometimes state on job adverts that the hiring manager is looking for something very specific. It could be maybe change related, sector specific, that kind of thing. I lose count of the amount of CVs that I do receive that don't emphasize that specific point, even though those candidates may have that experience. So it's just very, I know it's an age-old, cliche of tailor your CV to every role you're going for, but it's very, very important to do so. Another point, following up with a recruitment manager or line manager if you can. Sometimes job adverts don't necessarily have contact details for them, whether it be a recruitment manager or comms person. But you have nothing to lose by searching, if the role does say reporting into senior internal comms manager or reporting into the head of comms, you've got nothing to lose by searching that, title into LinkedIn with the corresponding, client, and then just send them a brief introductory or follow-up message to say that you've applied and these are the reasons as to why you think you'd be a good match. It's not for everybody, but I think it does help and it does make you stand out. Don't be put off by the volume of applications for each role. Some candidates I've spoken to have said that they won't apply for a role if it has more than 50 or 100 applications. From the applications we received, there are many that don't necessarily hit the spot. There are many that maybe people apply that maybe they're not the right salary level or they don't have the right availability. If they have a notice period, they might not even have the right to work in the UK. So you never know who you're up against. So I'd never let that put you off. And the final tip is just to use your network. According to our latest piece of research with over 500 communications professionals, just 16% secure an interim role through job boards and online applications. 34% secured their role through a recruitment company, and 26% secure something through their existing network, whether that be somebody they've worked with previously, word of mouth, or an old client. So I'd recommend to speak to as many people as possible. Whether in the recruitment field or previous contacts, because sending off a LinkedIn application, you only have a 16% chance of securing a role that way. As I say, hopefully that helps. Top tips and insight into the market, and enough waffle from me. I will pass over to our first speaker, and we'll be sharing presentations. That's Geraldine Mapp.
Apologies, I thought I didn't realise I was going to have to unmute myself. Well, I've failed on the technology before I started. So anyway, hopefully you can now hear me. Hello, my name is Geraldine Mapp. I'm Director of Mapped Communications Limited. I've been working for just shy of 30 years. Half of that was external communication, but for the last 14 years, I have been leading teams around internal communications, and then more recently actually became an interim consultant. So having spoken to a couple of colleagues over the last few months who have found themselves in contracts that maybe haven't been frontline supporting the pandemic, I've been kind of shocked at how many people have found themselves a little bit rudderless as an interim, coming into a new contract, working for a business that they perhaps haven't even met some of the colleagues they're working with. It's kind of an unusual situation. And so I thought that would be an interesting talk for 10 minutes, just to sort of share my thoughts on how to own your own performance as an interim during a pandemic, or alternatively entitled, how not to become a bag in the wind, which was a phrase somebody used when they were describing their experience, which I thought was brilliant. So I've tried to think about the next 10 minutes in terms of who is listening. So there's going to be lots of folks on the call who are deeply experienced interim comms consultants, for whom this may not be all that helpful, but there might be some learnings in there. I'm really thinking about people who are either about to become an interim consultant because they're thinking about it, or perhaps are new to it. And I've probably had you more in my mind as I was kind of piecing this together. But anyway, let's start. So I've got 10 minutes. So on the first slide. So we've got 4 phases here of what it feels like to be an interim. So hopefully we all recognise, for those of us that have been started a career in interim consultancy, of that kind of really raring to go. I'm enthusiastic, I've got lots of experience, I'm going to really help my organisation that I'm going to come and work for add value and get the best out of the experience that you're going to bring. However, speaking on from a personal perspective, there is an adjustment from that kind of way, enthusiastic, I know I can make a difference, moving into actually recognising that perhaps you've been a full-time member of staff for an organisation for a very long time. So I spent the last 14 years prior to becoming a consultant leading a team of internal communicators for a FTSE transatlantic FTSE 25 business, where my voice was a very strong individual voice. I knew everything about that organisation. I was the go-to person. I knew what was underneath the business. I knew what the risks were that were emerging. When you're an interim and you a business that you don't know, you're not the go-to person. You have no credibility behind you because they don't know who you are. You know very little about that business. You suddenly find yourself in a rather anonymous position. You are another face in the crowd, another contributor. There are blessings to that as well. But nevertheless, there is an adjustment there where you are now going to have to be proactive in finding the value that you can add to that organisation that maybe is beyond the brief that you were asked for, because we all want to deliver value and we all want to leave an interim contract feeling that we've left it in a better place than when we found it. The third picture there, the bag in the wind, is unfortunately what it can feel like when you are going into a new interim contract, possibly for the first time, with a bad brief or an ambiguous brief, but certainly moving into an interim contract in the middle of a pandemic, which relates actually to the fourth image there, which is it can be an isolating experience. You're not seeped in the culture. You can't feel it because you're not physically there. You don't know who the people are to ask the intelligent questions where you can be curious. And as comms consultants, we like to think of ourselves as problem solvers. And it's difficult to be a problem solver when you're not steeped in the organisation and you know who to ask, you're physically not there. And add on top of that, as I say, the possibility of an ambiguous brief or possibly even a bad one, because not all clients are very clear about what they want. I have to say I'm very lucky to say I'm not in that situation. I'm working for an organisation that's very clear what they need from me. But it can be a very disconnecting experience to be an interim in the middle of a pandemic, working for an organisation you've got no knowledge of, with an ambiguous brief. And I thought that's the perfect storm, really, to maybe just think about how do you navigate your way through that. So this presentation is designed for those people that maybe find themselves as a bag in the wind. If you're like me and you're not one of those people, then this may be less helpful for you the next 10 minutes, but maybe pay attention anyway, because you don't know what your next contract is going to be like. So what I want to do is really just walk through 4 models that I've cherry picked. They're 4 models that I've used personally in my career that help define what is value and therefore potentially become stimulus material for you to look at and see where there is a sweet spot maybe there's a space where you can see you could add value because that organization maybe is weak on this point, and it gives you an opportunity to maybe go beyond the brief, or if you have an ambiguous brief currently, find the value that you can bring. So what I would suggest to you in the next few moments is, as I walk through these 4 models, is just sort of look at them critically and pick out the things that resonate most with you, thinking about either the organisation you're in currently or where you think you've got a strength and you could add value. Let's start with the first model. So this is a model that talks about how to create a high-performing team, and there are many models out there about how to create a high-performing team, and they don't all look like this. I've got two here that I use quite often, but these are two of my favorites, so I thought I'd start with this. So the Venn diagram there on the left, this is hopefully for those of you should already kind of understand the components of a high-performing team, but let me talk it through just in case this is new to you. So this is a simple model that talks about high-performing teams have three components that are strong. They have a good sense of direction, they know what their purpose is, they know what their goals are, they have a good team dynamic where they can challenge each other in constructive, positive ways and still be friends. And they have very clear ideas about how to deliver. So perhaps they've got good governance or good planning and good levels of accountability. So this is a good place to start and think, am I in a contract at the moment where I'm just not quite sure what value I'm supposed to be bringing because the brief is ambiguous? Is there a spot here where you think, actually, my client needs a bit of help and maybe I could proactively support them by picking one of these things? The diagram there on the right is one I've used myself when I was creating teams in the past. And this is essentially the same theme. Does everybody have a shared sense of purpose? Are they clear on what that is? Do we all know who our stakeholders are? And do we know who in the team is managing those stakeholders? Do we have a good team vibe? Are we able to challenge each other and still be friends at the end of it? And is everybody clear on process, and are those processes effective? So that's model one. And again, the exam question on here is, can you see a sweet spot that your client currently is not very good at, that you could maybe own and proactively go to them and say, I think you could do some help with blah. That's model one. Model two. So this is a relatively old model. This is a model that comes from the Communications Executive Board, CEB, and again, one I've used myself often. CEB, I think now is part of Gartner. And this really speaks more about what the value of the business is, which is another way of looking at it. What's the value of the business? How do they define their own value? And therefore, how could, as communicators, how could we support that? And the four buckets that CEB or Gartner used was boosting communication performance, employee performance, because ultimately that obviously drives business performance. So do our employees align their behaviours with the strategy? Is there cross-functional spaces where they can work together? Do they have good access to information? Enabling leader effectiveness, I think, speaks to itself. What does their leadership program look like? Does reducing organizational risk, is that a bit, are you in a regulated business where this might become very important? You know, what does non-compliance look like, and what's the worst that could happen? And are they good at managing that? And also, how do they differentiate themselves with competitors? So again, understanding that could add a flavor or a color to the way that you talk about your communications. So again, this is a different model to the high performing team, but it's good stimulus material to say, can I see a spot there where my client maybe isn't very good at one aspect of this, that I could proactively go to them and say, I think you need to do X, Y, or Z. That's model number two. Model number three is called the service profit chain. You might have also heard this referred to as service value chain. And I use this a lot. In fact, I've used it recently. I actually found myself having to explain to somebody why starting with leadership and your employees is a good place to start. I didn't think that was possible these days, but there are clients out there that still need that kind of level of advice. And it starts with the middle box in the middle, internal, service quality. What's the culture of the business? How is that supporting employee satisfaction and engagement? Which in turn, how is that impacting loyalty? How does that impact productivity? Because ultimately, all of that impacts the customer experience, which impacts the likelihood of repeat business, which impacts profit. So essentially, all this is saying is, if you start with your people and make sure that they want to deliver and that they are effective, ching ching, you're going to earn more money. The business is going to earn more money. So again, is there something here where your current client perhaps isn't good and you think there might be room for you to add more value by proactively suggesting some extra part of the brief that maybe wasn't the original ask when they brought you in? And then the fourth model is really just my own thoughts of just moving on to the next slide. And the fourth model is really about how the business might define value for itself. So this is less about communication and more about how the business defines value for itself. So it might see value as a significant commercial saving or benefit. It might see value as a critical piece of strategy that's going to shift the organization. It might see value as a new way of working. It might see value as enhancing or protecting your client's reputation, or a step change in the performance of your people. Or it might be about creating a more productive work environment. I like these ones because, again, they just allow me to challenge myself and ask questions of myself, which is, bearing in mind, going to my first slide, we are people that are walking into a business we don't know. So we don't inherently kind of by osmosis know this stuff like you would when you're a full-time member of staff. So these are good questions to ask yourself, and certainly use when you're talking to your stakeholders as you try and become more curious about that business. What is it they're trying to do? How do they perceive value? And therefore, how could you as a communicator add value to what they're trying to do? So that was the last slide, just to give the next speaker a heads up. We are now on the last slide. I also just wanted to just end really with some thoughts about how I've had to manage myself during a pandemic, working for a client. I only met 6 weeks and then had to go into lockdown. So how do I make sure that I'm adding value, and I use those four models to help me, but how do I visibly kind of manage that? So one of the things is be very clear on what your own personal purpose is. Why are you there? What is it you're doing that's going to add value to them and make a difference? And hopefully those 4 models will help you understand what that is. So that's number 1. Know why you're there so that you can demonstrate that. Number 2, interims often don't get performance managed, which I think is a shame. As somebody that used to hire interim consultants, I always gave feedback where I could. What I've done for myself is I've proactively scheduled performance conversations with my client, and I meet them every 3 months. I produce a document for them. Here's the brief. Here's what I've done in 3 months against that brief. Here's some learnings. Here's what I'm going to do in the next 3 months. And here's an opportunity for you to tell me some stuff that maybe I don't know about my own performance. I think it's important we proactively own our own performance and schedule those in if you don't have regular conversations with your client. Make your insights data driven. Again, if you don't know the organization, it's important that if you are giving an insight, you're doing it with some data behind you to demonstrate you really are getting to grips with that organization. It means that you're much more likely to be listened to and seen as credible. That's something I've learned. So I make sure that when I'm talking to a new client, somebody I've never worked with before, my insights are data driven from them or from the market. And then finally, which I think some of our other speakers are going to be talking a bit more about, it's an obvious one, but be proactive in creating and nurturing those virtual relationships. It's actually easier than I thought. You know, the technology and Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever it is you use does actually make that a little bit easier, I thought, more easy than I thought it was going to be. But in these times, as an interim consultant where you need to demonstrate value, it's in your interests to develop those relationships so that you can ultimately demonstrate the value you are bringing. And that's my thoughts. I think I may have just slightly gone over 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Really, really useful, and I'm sure everybody here would have well, like I say, found that really useful. So thank you very much. So our next speaker, I'll just hand over to Simon, who will share some of his insights over the past 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm Simon Monger. I've been working in internal communications for about 14 years, and I have been an internal comms, change and engagement consultant for the last 4 of those years. So I thought I'd actually share my personal experience and just practically what I've done over the last 6 months, just to give a little flavour to what Geraldine was talking about. As I say, I started consulting 4 years ago. I started just after the EU referendum. I didn't realise that it was going to get even more interesting after that. This year has certainly been enlightening. And I actually started working with my current client during lockdown. And I was fortunate that I'd worked with them before. So I knew a few of the people that I was working with, but there were a lot of new people that I hadn't come across before that I had to get to know and get to know quickly. Onboarding is always going to be interesting and different, and particularly so if you're not physically, I haven't physically seen any of them at all. And I think for me, it took being in the right headspace, because I began working actually 2 contracts concurrently, working part-time. So I had 3 days a week with one and 2 days a week with another. And as silly as it sounds, there were some practical things I did that were really helpful just to get me in the right frame of mind. Sitting at a different desk at my dining room table as I am now, silly as it sounds, really helps, because it gives you just a different perspective, a different view. It helps you to separate your week. Obviously, using different equipment was quite helpful. So I used my own equipment for one contract. I was using a company laptop for another. So again, there are little things that just make your day feel different, and different routine, different hours. Anything that you can control to help give you that compartmentalization is really important when you are sat in the same physical location. I also proactively went, okay, I'm going to have to use certain systems. Can I have all of the logons ahead of time? Can I check that I can access Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Office remotely? Whereas normally you might leave that until you start and then try and figure everything out. I made sure I had that the week before. Everything was working and I was ready to go. That was particularly helpful, obviously, because you can't have an IT person come over and see you. And particularly so because the client I'm working with are in Sweden. So that was never going to be an option. I had to be able to hit the ground running straight away. I also made sure that I had a lot of conversations with my client before I started. Now, obviously, you would normally talk about what's required, but I had quite a few more conversations getting very specific. I had a brief that was not a bad brief, but it was not a very clear brief, back to Geraldine's point. And so I really got into the detail of understanding, what is it that you're really looking for, being very clear on expectations, both my expectations and theirs, so that I could get started straight away and know that I was going in the right direction, because I wouldn't be getting that regular feedback. And coupled with that, there is the need for a constant dialogue when you start. So again, you might do this on any contract, but particularly having, in my case, a daily catch up to make sure that I was just checking in, giving them reassurance that I was working through all the material they were giving me, asking the questions, things that you would normally do when you go to grab a coffee or you just go and walk over to somebody's desk. You can't do that. So you have to manufacture those situations. But then just keep checking in and going, is it okay that we're having these calls every day? I don't want to be taking up, your time if we don't need to. So just constantly a two-way dialogue. I think that's particularly helpful. And then when it comes to video calls, which, Geraldine said it's quite a surprise how easy we found it in many respects, and that is true. But there are certain things when you're building relationships that I found quite helpful. If you think of an actor on a stage in a theatre will often exaggerate expression and movement so that the people at the back can know what's going on. And I know it sounds a little bit odd, but I kind of do that too. So if you're on a call, being extra friendly or smiley or nodding more than you might, just to show that you're understanding and really getting across some of that personality, I think is really important if you're not going to be with those people in person. And that's been commented on in a good way. I'm quite smiley anyway, but it's been picked up saying, oh, you're really personable, you're fitting in. The culture that I'm working in is very personable. It's all about relationships. If you don't get on with people, then it's not going to function. So that's a tip I found has helped. I think also paying attention to what's in the background, and we all look in everybody's backgrounds on their screens, but when you're getting to know people, there was one person in particular, a Danish colleague, who had a book in the background that I also had. So we had a conversation about that. And again, it's getting to know the personal side of someone and just kind of keeping your eyes open for, the cat jumping up on the furniture or just something that gives you a personal connection. It really helps to kind of drive that conversation. because it boils down to human connection ultimately. Remembering that the pleasantries, we don't have time for them as much as we used to have. So if you think when you used to go to a meeting in a meeting room, you'd arrive early, the meeting before would be overrunning, you'd stand in the corridor and chat. We don't do that anymore. There's often a feeling that you are performing when you turn up on a screen. So people cut straight to the chase. So making the effort to really continue to have those conversations and ask people, it's really simple, but how was your weekend? How was your night? You know, how are you doing? How's your day going? People don't always think to ask you, but remembering those things, people really appreciate it. And again, you just find it's manufacturing those situations just helps to make you more personable and get to know the people that you're working with a little bit more. And the final point on this little bit really is around empathy. Being empathetic, we're all going through this situation, but we're all experiencing it differently. There was a nice phrase I read only this morning around we're all going through the storm, but we're all in different boats. And just acknowledging that, you know, we're all going through different experience and that we're all doing the best that we can. So how can I support you? How can I help you? How can I make your life easier? As a consultant, I'm a pain reliever. That is primarily how I describe myself. I'm there to give you less pain, not more pain. So how can I help you make, you know, get through what you need to and keep doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing? And all of this leads to the point that if people trust you, they're going to, if they like you, they're going to trust you. And that means that they're going to see that you're delivering value. Getting the basics right are really going to help you in the long run, particularly when you're not going to be seeing those people. So moving on to back to value and kind of how I'm adding value. I think, again, it's not dissimilar to what you would normally do, but you demonstrate your value through what you do and how you do it, how you conduct yourself. So particularly remotely, I think the thing I was very conscious of was delivering with pace. We always deliver with pace when you're contracting because that's kind of what you're being brought in for. But really identifying early on, what are the 2 or 3 things, they don't have to be big things, but what are the 2 or 3 things I can do incredibly quickly, turn it out at good quality so that they then have the reassurance that, yes, actually, I'm able to do this and I'm going to be delivering what they need. So deliver something quickly. If you're on a project like I am at the moment, which is quite long term, and therefore it's not always so easy to deliver quick things, at least show progress that's being made and regularly updating, keeping things moving. So again, they can see that you're doing what you're meant to be doing. It got to one point where someone said to me, yeah, you know what, we're comfortable now. You can just do it. You don't have to update us. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's great. But it got to the point where they were confident, and that's the position you kind of want to be in, where they then leave me to it and I can just crack on. And there is a little bit around self-motivation as well. I think you know, it's easy to be self-motivated when you are in that office setting and you have the buzz and the energy and the interactions and all of the stuff that we love. And motivating yourself at home is a different matter. So you do have to be able to self-motivate, work out what drives you as an individual, kind of to the performance point. What makes you perform well, and actually understanding how you can self-motivate was definitely something that got me off to a good start during what was, particularly April. If we think back to April, May, we were all figuring out what the heck was going on. That was really helpful just to keep me ticking over. Digital tools, which Geraldine touched on, but Microsoft Teams has been a lifesaver. I'd never used it before, but it's been really helpful for speeding up processes. So whereas normally you might have a large collaborative meeting with 20 people where you get everybody's ideas and you workshop it out, now I'm using it as I have a document, I upload it, everybody can edit it, we can have a conversation in the chat, we can do things a lot more quickly and in a way that is more respectful of people's time and also of my time. I don't have to spend 20 different meetings trying to get information from everyone. We can do it all collaboratively and quickly and transparently, which again shows progress. And I think also there's something around when you've delivered those quick wins and you're delivering value and you've got those good relationships, where else do you turn? So Geraldine touched on all the extra things that you can deliver. For me, because briefs are often quite loose, particularly for contracts, I think it's looking at, okay, how can I use my network? So I like to be networked. I like to be in contact with people. I talk to people all the time just because I enjoy that. but it's really helpful because then I get to see how everybody else is dealing with this situation. So I'm not directly working on a pandemic related project, but it is massively influenced by it. And I get to talk to people in other industries, and then provided they're happy for me to do so, I can feed that back to my client, and they get the insight that they would never have otherwise of what else is happening, how are other industries coping with this, what are the techniques that they're using. So my network and being a membership of a global professional body is also really helpful. If I want to find out what's happening in Australia, I can contact someone and go, well, how are you dealing with this? You know, particularly with my client is global. We're working in 30 countries. So therefore, every country is a different point in the process. Being able to know someone who either works in that country or nearby is really helpful for just providing that extra confidence. And people were saying to me last week, you know, your insight and understanding of what else is happening, we don't even think about it, but that's really helpful. It gives us a head start. It makes us feel reassured that we're doing the right thing. And I think the last point for me is around setting boundaries, setting your own boundaries. So I'm sure we have all found ourselves working later and later, or earlier and earlier, because we're at home and we can do. And this connects directly to value for me. So I can work a 12-hour day, of course I can, and I can turn things out if I need to. But actually, am I delivering high value, high quality work for all of that? Possibly not. If I set the boundaries to a standard day and I work those hours and I do what I would normally do, but then I'm strict with myself and I switch off, that can be really helpful. And it means that the value of the work I'm doing is going to be higher. So I have become increasingly strict with myself. I will go out for a lunchtime walk. I will start at a reasonable time and I will finish at a reasonable time. And yes, of course, that varies depending on what's coming up. But being strict with yourself is helpful because obviously it's going to keep you healthy and fit and able to do your job, but the value of what you're delivering is going to be better and more beneficial. So just to summarize the sort of 4 takeaways for me, just hope these are useful to you. The first one, be proactive with your own onboarding. We normally do this anyway, but really get in there quickly, understand who we need to talk to, proactively setting up time with people, not waiting for it to kind of happen. You need to take the lead. Be super clear on expectations, and that's your expectations as well as theirs to avoid any misunderstandings down the line. If someone likes you, they trust you and they trust your work. So spend the time getting the basics right, getting to know people, establishing those relationships, and that will really help you down the line. And the last one around bringing insights from outside the organization. If you have contacts and people from outside experiencing similar things, make sure that you're bringing those into your organization and you're explaining and helping your client to understand what it's like for everybody else as well. Don't just feel you have to stick to the job spec you've been given. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. I think that really complemented Geraldine's slides really, really well. Some great tips and hints in there for interims who are maybe in the job market or just looking for some, more piece of advice on how to nail their current contract. So now we'll go to our final speaker. Last but by no means least, we have Kyla Yates, and Kyla is an interim CMO, so she'll bring a bit more of a different perspective from maybe the marketing side of things. So over to you, Kyla.
Thank you. So hello, everybody. I've been a technology marketer for about just over 30 years, with mostly global experience, and an interim for the last 6 years. And I think that, and actually started an interim role during lockdown. I've never met a single person in the company that I'm working with and driving their marketing strategies. Quite an interesting environment. I'll talk a lot more about how that's played out and some of the onboarding and some of the things that I've learned from this specific company that I'd really like to move forward with. But I'll start really with somewhat in line with what Simon and Geraldine was saying. Is I tend to get a lot of the work directly from my network. So really, the power of your network is at the heart of everything we do, and especially if you're an interim. But within that, there's also knowing yourself. You're often, I often have conversations with potential clients that aren't going to go anywhere because I know myself, I know what I'm good at, and I know the type of projects that are a good fit for me. But having that network where you can say, I don't think this is right for me, but I know someone, I know Geraldine, I know Simon, I know other people within the network that would be a better fit for you I found that really invaluable, and likewise, you know, being able to get the same back from my network has been incredibly powerful and great for the last 6 years. So, but that also plays to taking the brief. You know, at the heart of everything we do is understanding the brief and what's required of the particular project you're working on, what the expectations are, the tangible expectations and the intangibles, more of the soft skills that you need to apply. So I spend actually quite a lot of time in that initial getting to know you phase, if you like, really scoping out the end result that the client is looking for. Almost all of the projects I've worked on in the last 6 years have been quite big, quite large marketing transformations. Often an organization has grown to a certain size and they want to bring in a different talent set or change the way that they are marketing. In fact, one of my clients that I did a short-term project for was debating whether they should outsource their entire marketing function. So, you know, really large digital, but also transformative marketing projects. And within that, there's, you know, the scope can be quite extensive, and there's usually a time limitation. So it's understanding what you're able to achieve in that short term and the long term, and really being able to, you know, one, articulate that and understand and ensure that you've captured those expectations, but also what the measurements will be and how that execution will be supported across the organization. So, you know, who's impacted and how do you go about making sure that it's a success, but also really understanding the culture of the organization that you're going to go into. Geraldine sort of touched on this, and I liken it to being a chameleon, but the chameleon's really impacted this time with COVID. Usually you can go in and you understand the culture, you can see the way that colleagues interact with one another. During COVID, you can't. So we'll come to the assignment I'm in at the moment. All the interviews, the whole, you know, getting to know you phase and understanding the scope of the project were through Teams or Zoom calls or telephone. And that was through all of the executive committee, and in fact, even in this particular condition, they're PE backed, so talking to some of the board and the private equity team to really get under the skin of what they were looking for, but completely, you know, remote. Onboarding was an absolute pleasure, to be honest. A Friday afternoon, my laptop, phone, badge for the office, should I need to go in, arrived and, you know, nicely packed with instructions and really easy to get on. Monday morning, first call is with the CEO, and we'd agreed what that schedule of calls would be. He checked in with me pretty much every other day to make sure I had everything I needed. And really, so a lot of it is the pre-planning. It's like anything, most of us marketers are used to spending considerable time in the planning of a campaign. And actually the execution is then, you know, seamless, or the implementation is easier. Planning my onboarding, who I was going to talk to, having an assistant in the company that can actually schedule all those calls, manage your diary, so you're not having to spend time with that sort of administrative task, but you can get on with the job in hand. And I think the biggest challenge is getting to know a team in an incredibly short period of time, with the knowledge that you're about to make some fairly transformative changes to that team, getting to know their skills, understanding who you've got in your team, what their skill sets are, and what the organization, and knowing what the organization needs, being able to make those recommendations, you know, in a very agile way, and understanding how you're going to go about making those implementations. But then really it becomes about also knowing what you can and can't do. You know what you can do within the short time frame that you have, and what needs to be moved over to the next, you know, in this case, there's a new head of marketing, so I was involved in the recruitment, but now we'll be on, you know, on helping to onboard them. It's what can I do now, and what can what should be passed on to the new head of marketing to own? Really considering all of the different steps of that change and planning it out, and understanding what are the priorities that will drive your strategy. What are the priorities that will be impacted by the change you're about to impose, and really understanding what the impact will be. I'm very conscious of time, so I'll try and wrap up quickly. Not meeting your team, but gaining trust. I've done that a lot, as Simon talked about, is teams. I start work at 7:30, I close at 7. I make sure that during the day I have time for just a moment to sort of, you know, capture a couple of minutes to make sure I'm really still on track. We can get distracted by whatever happens and is happening at that particular moment. Not to get distracted and to be able to come back to what are my objectives and where do I need to go. And really getting underneath the skin of the company and being able to communicate those changes across the organization in a way that's meaningful to them and is in the tone, style, and language of that company. So the chameleon has learnt to change its colors based on working out of my living room, but with colleagues that are working out of their living rooms. It's been an incredibly interesting exercise, but I think my global experience working with remote teams, I don't feel like it's that different. I haven't felt like it's been an incredibly difficult or imposing structure that COVID has given us. I think it's made us all see each other a lot more as human beings. You see the CEO sitting in his living room, and he's working from his dining table just as you are. Is, I think, an incredibly important change that we've now all been through. As hard as it has been, I think it has helped to take some of those layers out, and we all see each other as human beings. So, gosh, that was a lot more philosophical than I intended to be, but I appreciate we've got running out of time, so I'll stop now if that's okay, Matthew, and just pass over for Q&A.
Absolutely, and you're welcome to be as philosophical as you like. That's not a problem at all. Again, thank you, really, really helpful, and from that different perspective of CMO, as opposed to Geraldine and Simon on the internal and change communication side of things. So yes, a few 5 minutes to go, maybe. Now, a few questions. So I just wanted to start off. There's a few directed at Simon. If you don't mind, Simon, we'll head over to you first. So Claire asks, which global professional body are you a part of?
Yes, so I'm on the board of the IABC, so the International Association of Business Communicators. They've been incredibly helpful, actually. I joined a couple of years ago, so I give a little bit of a plug now, but it was just really helpful for immediately connecting you with people that I would never have the opportunity to otherwise meet. So I now have a massive network in Asia Pacific that I never had before. And have just found it really helpful as the world gets smaller and we're all stuck in the place we're in. It's just been really good for bouncing ideas off, sense checking and that kind of thing. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. Plug end.
No worries, plug away. And another question for yourself from Joanne. You mentioned about the demarcation of days between your clients, given the often urgent needs of clients. How do you manage the demarcation of days between your clients, given the often urgent needs of clients which change regularly?
That's a good question. It's largely just down to transparency. So I was always very honest and said, right, I am Monday to Wednesday, I work for this client, and Thursday, Friday, I'd just say I'm not available. So they don't need to know what I do on those days. I'm not an employee. I'm not available to work. I am available to you for the period of time that we have agreed. And if you are, it's a mindset shift again, because you would naturally think, oh, well, I could do Thursday, or I could swap it round. And of course, if there was something truly urgent, then yes, I did occasionally swap it. But otherwise, no, I'm there for that time, and I'm just very honest and open about it. and 95% of the time it works without problem because they're working around other people's diaries as well. So just be transparent.
Thank you. Now, a question from Andrew with regards to moving sectors. So what are your views on moving sectors? I guess this is more for myself and Andrew, although it could also be for the panelists as well. But, oh, Carla, yes, absolutely.
I was going to say, can I answer that?
Of course, thank you very much.
No, not at all. I was reading it and I thought, oh, I've got to answer that. I would tell you not to worry. I think the travel and transport industry experience, especially for FMCG and that kind of, more consumer background is very much in call for. And certainly when you look at B2B companies, we are now understanding, especially B2B marketing, we really understand that taking some of that cross-sector experience is really important. Most B2B companies are targeting specific sectors. So, bring that sector experience into a marketing function is very valuable, but also understanding what your skills are and being able to apply them to, other industries would, I think, really play well for you.
And also, just to very briefly build on that, I'm a point in case. So since consulting, I have worked for construction, academic publishing, professional services, retail, and sort of energy. So, I've moved around intentionally. So it's definitely not a barrier. You're bringing your skills into whichever environment it happens to be. They're hiring you for your expertise. It doesn't matter which sector it is.
Thank you both. I couldn't agree more. Now, Andrew asks, are you seeing a trend of companies culling contracts, for example, cost cutting because of the COVID, because of the general economy? I will say from my perspective, the answer to that is yes, it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction back in March and April time when it first, lockdowns was upon us. Around a third of the contractors that we had working were cold, if you want to use that term. Their contracts were cut short. But since then, around, probably 95 to 100% of the contractors that we've had out working have really shown their worth to the organisation and have had contract extensions through to the end of the year and into early 2021. So we haven't seen much of that since the beginning of lockdown, but we did at the time. Now, I saved this question. Was actually the first question, but I saved it till last because it's opening up a can of worms really with regards to IR35 and tax changes. But a question again from Andrew, what are your predictions for IR35 and tax changes? I've heard suggestions that the government will have no choice but to raise tax to pay for all the debt. Now, yes, I don't know if I'm quite qualified enough with regards to my tax knowledge and which taxes will be increased, over the coming years to pay for all this debt. All I can say is that because of the recent tax changes and the IR35 change, the amount of increased tax they're getting now from contractors or are perceived to be getting from contractors, I can only hope that they will not decide to target the contract market and contract economy once again by increasing taxes even further. I don't know the honest answer, and I haven't heard anything. We, as a recruitment company, haven't heard anything in the recruitment news or IR35 weekly. But I mean, all I can think is how much can you keep targeting the contract economy? I don't know. I don't know if any other panelists or if Andrew have anything more to say on that. But
I would say just briefly before I drop off, I have to go unfortunately, but I'd agree with Matt. I mean, it's crystal ball stuff. I think it's very difficult for us to predict. As Matt says, as a recruitment business, being tuned into, we're a member of a professional body for recruiters, as you would be, as Simon is for communications people, and when we're not seeing any particular new news, etc., coming through from that. So it's a bit of a kind of who really knows, but I kind of agree with what Matt has said.
Okay, and now that's the hour. So I don't know if there's any more questions at all, but I just wanted to say thank you again for Simon, Geraldine and Kyla for your insights, for the 80 or so guests that we've had today. We will run another Sing event by the end of the year. We try like to run them monthly, every 4 or 6 weeks. So do keep an eye out for the next one. And any other questions for ourselves or the panelists, feel free to connect on LinkedIn and ask away. Like I say, it's networking is the #1 with Interim. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.